Okay, so the point behind Chapter 11 that we're going to be doing in your book is to get you ready for the EagleSoft project that you're going to be doing. If you have your textbook and you have Chapter 11 open, which, of course, I didn't before I started recording, you'll notice that it's full of a lot of pictures, and it keeps talking about this design matrix. So even though this PowerPoint is 47 slides long, we are not going to go through it to that extent. But this PowerPoint, again, will be helpful when you are doing the EagleSoft project that's coming up. As far as your book goes, I would make sure there's really nothing in here that isn't important. I mean, maybe you don't have to read about what an appointment card does because you already know that. But I would definitely make sure that you review the concept of dovetailing, which we're going to be talking about, that you look over the dentist body clock, which we're going to be talking about, and the differences between prime time and, when is good to schedule emergency patients or kids or things like that. So those are some of the things that we're going to be going through. If you notice, this PowerPoint doesn't look anything like mine normally do, and that's because this one is from the book. So, an appointment management system, since we've been talking about EMR and EHR, this can happen in a book. So you can actually have an appointment book like we talked about if the office utilizes paper charts instead of an EMR or an EHR. But the chapter mainly concentrates on offices that utilize an EMR. So when we talked about EMR and EHR, we talked about something called a clinical information system, which is how do we run our office now that we're using computers. So what this first slide is talking about is within the office, if the office manager and dentist decide how they want appointments to run, so if they want a regular follow-up cleaning to be 30 minutes, but a new patient to be an hour, or 45 minutes, that kind of a thing, that's what this is talking about. So if everybody is on the same page and understands how to book patients, it makes life in the office much easier. And I can speak from experience that when you have people who don't know how to book patients properly based on what they're coming in for, or their age or things like that, it could create a backlog and people waiting in the waiting room and some angry physicians. So, we've talked about dentistry as a business before. So the idea behind this is that we want to make sure that every chair is filled all the time. So think about you guys as students. You want to make sure that you have a patient in your chair all the time so you are meeting your requirements so that you can graduate. It's kind of the same thing, but with a money twist to it. So, if no one's in the chair, there's no profit coming in, but there are still bills to pay. So if you're reading this and you see the word overhead right here, that's what that means. It's when overhead is the money that you have to put out to keep the business running. Okay, you could read this yourself. You've been in the waiting room before when you're waiting for 2 hours or an hour or a half hour and you're aggravated. So that's why it really does start with the appointment book. Again, you could either use an appointment book or you could use an electronic system, and we're going to concentrate on an electronic system, which is what this slide talks about. So, traditional books, we're just going to go right to the picture. You notice that they are, I've described this to you before, but some of you may have never worked with one of these before. So basically what would happen is you would have a person's name right there with their phone number written in pencil. So if someone erased under here, it could possibly erase under here. Or then you get the fist smudge. So that's why, even though some offices might not use an EMR to their full capability, they'll at least use them for appointment scheduling, because this is so outdated anymore. So we've talked about scheduling through an EMR, where you can look up a patient's information, their last name, their date of birth, something like that, and you can pull up when their next appointment is going to be. You could also just pull up the appointment screen and see who you have that day. So these pictures that are in here are also in your book, but these are pictures from the software EagleSoft, which is the project you're going to be working on. So these are images that you are going to be seeing. As far as why they're color-coded, and some are red, and some are blue, and some are light blue, and some are yellow, I'm not going to tell you why, because when you guys are playing with EagleSoft, I want you to figure that part out. So, then there's the demographics screen. This is a demographics screen from EagleSoft. So demographics is going to include everything from the patient's name, their address, their phone number, their gender, their marital status, sometimes, not all the time, definitely their date of birth, their social security number, their insurance information, and usually within this, it also includes their HIPAA information. This, again, is a screen that you will see in EagleSoft, and you'll notice over here, this is the HIPAA part. This family members section, if, let's say, Angie Abbott, if she had a daughter or a husband within the practice, it would show down in the family members block. So this way it would let you know that those people were linked together. And you can play with all of these buttons when we get to that project. So what this does is, instead of flipping through that book and trying to find that person's appointment, what you could do is you can look up the person's appointment, and you can see their history of appointments and times. Units is like how many 15-minute or 10-minute windows it took, what doctor they saw, what happened, and usually if you scroll over more, it'll actually show you if the patient kept the appointment or not. So this is a great way to show trends of patients' appointments and how often they come. I almost clicked on this next button over here. Okay, so this is a really cool screen that you guys will be able to see. When you guys are in your appointment scheduling, there's this little M, and it means monthly. And you'll be able to look at this. So usually the dentists are the ones who look at this screen. But this is a screen that shows someone how many time slots are available that day, usually in a percentage. How many are open, how many are filled, and how much money could be made in that day. So if you look at this one that's highlighted, it's really hard to see in the PowerPoint, but $960 worth of work is scheduled, and that's the goal for the day, which means it's at 100%. It's already completely filled. Some other offices that you might look at will give you, like, the day is 90% filled and there's 10% worth of appointments that are still open. But this is just based on productivity. So this is something where you see up here there's a total of 22 appointments. This one, the day before, it only has 10 appointments booked, so it's not at goal yet. Or maybe it is because there's a meeting or something like that. So depending on how many slots are open, what clinicians are in the office that day, things like that. But this is a way for physicians and for people kind of in the accounting part of things to see how much money they can make, and it adds it up down here at the bottom. So here's how much they are scheduled to make just on that particular day. So this becomes really important, especially if your dentist decides to take a day off. Then you got to cram those people in somewhere else, otherwise he or she loses that money. So when you're doing the EagleSoft project, this might be something that you would want to look at. But it is really beneficial for offices. Another thing that you can do, and you can also do this through Dentrix, it's called a short call list. So you can look in EagleSoft and you can look in Dentrix and you can have it run a report of patients who have canceled or missed their appointments. So this way you can call them to get them rescheduled and get them in for an appointment, hit that productivity, and get a patient in your chair. So like I said, you can even do this with Dentrix so that when you're a patient, or when you're working in the clinic and you need to get a patient in the chair, you could use this, we call it a recall list. So this is just a picture of what that looks like in EagleSoft, and it shows you if they showed up to the appointment or not. So this way you can call them and have all the information right in front of you and book them an appointment. So the date that's on the far left was the last time that they were seen. So, we've talked about this through EMR and the EHR lecture as well, but the previous images that you just saw kind of explain these bullet points that are on here. So it just makes it a lot clearer and easier to read, and there's a lot more that you can track much faster than using a physical appointment book. You also can make sure that patients aren't double booked. So maybe you're on the phone with a patient and schedule them for Monday, but someone else schedules the same patient for Wednesday by accident. It's just a lot easier. So you could read these bullet points yourself. So this matrix that your textbook starts to talk about is basically, think about when you get a planner for the year, or you get a calendar at the beginning of a new year. The first thing that you do usually is you go in and you mark off all the holidays. You mark off the days that you'll either be off from work or off from school if you know them. And you mark in people's birthdays, for example. That's what this is talking about. So at the beginning of a year, before you're even going to start putting patients into the schedule, you want to make sure that you block off lunch hours, that you close off the holidays, that you block off any of the dentist vacation days. If you're going to have huddles, you make sure that those times are blocked off in the schedule. So this way, what that does is it prevents anybody from scheduling a patient during that appointment and then you having to reschedule that patient when that week shows up. So if you don't have your lunch periods blocked off, you now are working through lunch for months and months and months until someone catches on. So the matrix is all of the dates that you want to block out before you start putting patients in there, basically. So buffer periods are great to use. Your book talks about them quite a lot. Usually a buffer period is really, really good to put in the morning and then again in the afternoon. Just kind of to use as a catch-up period. So, for example, my one doctor that I worked for, he would start patients at 8:30, but usually he wouldn't show up from doing his hospital consults until 9, so he was already 3 or 4 patients behind. So I usually blocked off his 10 o'clock spot, and I wouldn't let anybody schedule a patient at 10 o'clock because he was already going to be running behind. So I used that as his buffer position. Then he would go to work. He would end up going to lunch a little bit late. He would start his afternoon at 1 o'clock, and by 2 o'clock he would start to lose his steam big time. So I used to block off his 2:15 and his 2:30 go get him a coffee, and then he would catch back up really quickly. And because he was double booked in spots, even though I used those buffer periods to let him catch up, he never lost any revenue. So that's what it's talking about. The other thing is that if he was having a decent day and he wasn't running behind, then that guaranteed me about 2 or 3 appointments each day, just in case someone had an emergency, that they could come in during that time and the doctor wouldn't have to work over his lunch. So you don't want to put it at the busiest parts of the day. And once you're working in a practice, you'll know the busiest parts of the day. So for us, 8:30, 11:30, 1 o'clock, and 3:30 were our busiest parts of the day. Because it's before work, right around lunch, when someone can run on their lunch break, and almost when work is over or school is over. So that's why I put the buffers in different spots. And even though he used to yell at me when I would put the buffer in, or wonder why his spot was blocked, he would thank me later. So sometimes you need to be smarter than them, because you do know what's better for them. Because they sometimes think that they're superhuman and they can see every single patient possible, and they can't. So again, having those buffer periods in there is great because you can get emergency patients in there. These are some questions that your book gives you to ask to determine if it really is a dental emergency. I'm not going to go into these questions because that's what your teeth people are for as you move forward. But just knowing that you have some time in the schedule to slide in these emergency patients is always good. I completely disagree with this first bullet point, but because it is in the book, and it is definitely in your book, we need to go by what your book says for this one. Personally, working in an office, it's not my job to work around a kid's nap. It's the parent's job to work the appointment around the rest of the kids' schedule. But hey, I am not Mosby. I didn't write this book. So please feel free to laugh very hard at that first bullet point. The other thing is it says children may be more active and alert in the morning. But basically, for my practical experience, you got to ask the parents. Especially if you're dealing with an autistic child or if you're dealing with a special needs child, you might need to deal with them at different times of the day. I personally don't care when they nap, but your book definitely does, so remember that part. Older adults. Older adults always crack me up because they wake up at 5 and I'm completely stereotyping here, but they wake up at 5 in the morning, they have nothing to do, so they want the 8:30 appointment. I used to never give retired people the 8:30 appointment because people who work need that appointment way more than the retired person who could come any time of the day. But your book suggests not to schedule them during high traffic times. I don't know if that's a dig at how they drive or that they would be late, but I didn't write this PowerPoint, nor did I write this book. But I have to tell you about the chapter. Now, this is something to definitely pay attention to, and this is something that you're going to learn the longer that you're with your physician. So I was just talking about my one boss, that he would start getting tired at 2 o'clock, and I knew the days where he'd be able to snap out of it, and I knew the days where he didn't, and I'd have to run downstairs to the coffee shop and get him a coffee, and then put a stick of gum next to it so that he could get moving. The more that you work with someone, you know when they're going to be at their best. So he was the happiest, and he worked the fastest. Well, no. I'm going to stop myself there. He was the happiest right after lunch with the 1 o'clock patients, but he also chatted the most with the 1 o'clock patients. So that's why he got behind, and I made the 2 o'clock buffer, and he would usually start to peter out a little bit. In the morning, if lunch was looming, he could catch up quick. Or if at the end of the day he had to run to the hospital, he could catch up quickly. But I know that about him because I paid attention. That's his biological clock. So when you're scheduling appointments, it's helpful to kind of pay attention to those things. Yeah, you can read this yourself. I don't think that this is a surprise on this slide. To me, this slide is more common sense. Any office that can cater to people's work and school schedules is a beautiful, beautiful place, in my opinion. Because even think of you guys, how many times you've had to miss class because you have to get to a doctor's appointment because they don't do appointments prior to 8:30, and they don't do them after 4:30, and that's when you're in class. So, okay, prime time is the busiest time in the dental office, and it completely differs depending on the specialty that you're working in and the community that you're working in. So you'll know your prime time of when you're going to be the most hectic. People who are late. A lot of the times, people who are late end up getting dismissed from the practice because they've been late so much. Things that we used to have this group of patients who they always ask for the 3:30 appointment slot, and our doctor left at 4, no questions asked, and it was a mother who made the appointment for 3 of her kids. She would never show up until 4:15. And he would sit there and he would wait for them, and we always knew they were going to be late, and he would see them anyway, and they were never punished or anything like that. So I would make their appointment for 3:30 in the appointment book, but on their appointment card, I wrote that the appointment was 3 o'clock, and in the computer, I even wrote a note, put on appointment card 3 p.m., and it actually started helping. Then they actually were showing up on time instead of late. So sometimes you have to do that to patients and kind of lie on the appointment card a little bit. Just be careful of this with the confirmation call. So that's why I always would put it in the notes section also. Sometimes if a patient needs to come to the office multiple times, so if they're getting a root canal, and that root canal procedure is going to take 3 different appointments, it's better to book all 3 of those appointments at once rather than booking them each time the patient comes in. This way you can guarantee that those time slots are open. That's what this is talking about. If a patient shows up and they're not in the schedule, basically go by what your office policy says. So in most offices, you have to go ask the doctor, dentist, provider, whatever you want to call them, if they'll still see the patient. If they say no, then you have to reschedule the patient. The funniest one that I ever got was after daylight savings time. I don't remember if the clocks went forward or back an hour, but we had a patient show up 1 week and 1 day late, and he blamed it on daylight savings time, which I thought was hysterically stupid. If it's the patient's error, and it does happen a lot, if it's the patient's error, never be critical of them, because one day you'll be in their shoes. So try and get them in the schedule relatively quickly. If they have shown up and the error was your fault somehow, or the office's fault, you gotta somehow try and make an accommodation to get that patient in that day. Because remember, if you aggravate that patient and they walk out the door and complain about your office, then word of mouth travels fast. So remember that we talked about in week 1 about quality customer service. Walk-ins. This is going to be part of your office policy. Does your dentist allow people to just walk in off the street and say, yo, hey, can I get my teeth cleaned? Some will allow this and some won't. So you just have to check your policy on that one. Broken appointments. An office usually has a policy on this as well. You guys have all probably been a patient where if you don't call and cancel your appointment within 24-hour notice that you get a $50 no-show fee or something like that, and used as a deterrent so that people will keep their appointments. And the reason for that is because, you know, if that patient had taken up a half-hour slot and they cancel, now you don't have someone else to put in their place. So you've just lost some profit. And that's what the issue is. So people who have a tendency to no-show or cancel their appointments often without valid reason can also be dismissed from the practice. This is just a picture of, again, this is EagleSoft, but this is what it actually looks like when you start to chart teeth, and you may have seen some of this in Dentrix when you were in the clinic. And it's okay if you don't know what all this stuff means. You will once you're done with the teeth, people. But this is just showing you down here that he had a broken appointment. And now, broken appointment can either mean cancellation or no-show. Every EMR system kind of labels them differently. Okay, dovetailing. This is an important concept. So dovetailing is when you take a minor type of an appointment. So, like, let's say you guys are in clinic and you have a patient scheduled for a cleaning, but you also schedule someone to come in just to get fitted for their whitening tray, which takes 15 minutes, maybe. So they come in, you make sure that the whitening tray fits, you hand them their whitening solution, and they're on their own, and they go. So dovetailing is when you take a smaller, quickie procedure, and you kind of add it, you have the appointment at the same time as something else that's happening. So for instance, if you're doing a cleaning, and you've dovetailed a denture adjustment, you can be exposing the radiographs or waiting for the dentist to look at them on the patient you did the cleaning with, and while that patient is sitting there waiting, you can do the denture adjustment. So that's what dovetailing is when you take a smaller procedure and you schedule it at the same time as another procedure, so you can kind of be multitasking. That is in your book, so I'd make sure you read about that. Oh, you can read this yourself. You can read this yourself, too. This is going to be really, really, really important when you are working in the clinic. There are so many students who either confirm their patients way too early, and then the patients forget, or they confirm their patients at the last minute, and the patient goes, oh, I completely forgot, now I can't make it. So it's good to call patients about 2 days in advance. You don't want to over-remind them, though. You don't want to, call them 2 days before the appointment and then the day before the appointment and the morning of the appointment. But calling them a day or two prior to the appointment will allow you to at least give you some wiggle room to find another patient to take their spot if need be. Yeah, we talked about this being in pencil, though it's horrible in pencil because it gets erased. And if any of you are old enough to remember the erasable pens, that's just as bad. Usually within a traditional appointment book, you just write their first name, their last name, and their phone number. Usually that's all that you can fit in one of those appointment books. Because remember... Wait, hang on. That's what this thing looks like. So that's all the room that you get. And a lot of the times, you'll put one set of patients here and another set of patients here. So you only might have just this little line to write all of this information. Look at this. We're almost done. We're almost done. I'm just trying to find that slide again. We're close to done. Close to done. What we used to do, new patients, we used to highlight them in yellow, but then if a new patient canceled, then you're still left with the highlight. Sometimes we would use red pen for new patients. It's just a matter of, if you are going to use a physical appointment book, figuring out a system that works depending on how much room you have. Usually symbols will help you if you're using a traditional appointment book, but I think in this day and age that's going to be pretty rare. Again, it's much easier in an electronic system. So, for example, this is the picture. I only skipped these words because it shows you in the next screen. It's behind here is the appointment screen that you're going to see in EagleSoft. When I click on any patient's appointment time, I can change it. I could take this green appointment and I can click and drag it somewhere else, or I could just completely edit the day and time here. I would have to hit edit, and then I can change the times. So it's far, far easier. And it tells you right up here how many appointments that this person has canceled, has failed to show for, what their date of birth is, and things like that. So in the appointment screen, you get some demographic information, and what type of appointment it is. So I just kind of gave the color thing away. Hey, give people an appointment card. It's helpful. Look, these are pictures of appointment cards. I hope you laughed too. Hey, if someone cancels during the day, update the schedule. Yay. If you can't tell, it's not exactly one of my favorite PowerPoints, but some of the information that's in here will be helpful for you when you hit clinic. But a lot of the screens that you saw in this PowerPoint you will see when we get to the EagleSoft project. So this PowerPoint is now over, and I will see you later.